Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Today I am making a quilt. I had a little bit of this cute fabric with some animals and I wanted to make a baby quilt, so let's get started. I mentioned I started with the fabric, but really the beginning of this quilt started right here with this old book. I wanted to show you the size of the book. It's pretty old, 1981. So this book's been around a while. The binding is not really great, but I did see this quilt called Birds in the Air. And when I looked up that quilt block pattern in my other quilt books, it's called something else, and I'll leave those names down below. I thought this fabric would be really cute for that alternate square, the block that just the square fabric that surrounds all of those fun quilt blocks, and I used that fabric to choose all the colors that I'll be making my quilt blocks with. One of the easiest ways to pull fabric for a quilt is to use a fabric that has a print with lots of colors that you like, and I thought this fun baby fabric with Humpty Dumpty and the cow jumping over the moon and the three little pigs, that would be a really fun fabric just to choose colors to make my quilt with. So I pulled out these fabrics and then I cut my squares 3.5 inches, and the alternate square there is that white or muslin type fabric, and I'm going to make a lot of half square triangles to make my quilt block today. For each quilt block, I need 9 half square triangles, so I'm using 5 squares and I'll have 1 left over to get my 9 half square triangles. And like I always do, I drew a line from corner to corner and I'll sew on both sides of the line, and that's just to show you how to do it. And then after I do this first one, I am going to eyeball that pencil line. Pressing my half square triangles, I trimmed them all to 3 inches. Now I'll lay all my half square triangles out, and that old book I showed you earlier in this video called this block Birds in the Air, but when I look it up in an encyclopedia by Barbara Brackman, this quilt block has 4 names listed: Wild Geese, One Way, Trip to the Altar, and Geometric Patchwork. A really simple block that after putting all of my blocks together, I'm making 12. After putting them together, I'm going to set them in my quilt on point. Here are my quilt blocks on the floor going sort of this way and that. And here is the fabric that I will be using to surround my quilt blocks with squares and triangles. I have a little less than a yard and I wasn't sure I would have enough. If I didn't have enough, I was going to just find some blue fabric like that background. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but the way that I make quilts is kind of an adventure. I don't always know exactly what I'm going to do next. And this was, like I said, a little bit of an adventure. So right now I'm working on cutting triangles for the outside of the quilt. When you put your blocks on point, you need quite a few triangles to surround the outside of the main part of the quilt. So I'm cutting 3 big squares. I need 14 triangles, and out of these 3 squares I'm going to get 12 triangles. So I laid them on top of one another. I have a stack of 3, and I'm going to cut 2 times diagonally so that all of my bias edges are going to be on the inside. Sometimes if you put a bias edge on the outside of your quilt, it tends to stretch a little bit as you work along. And then I needed 2 more triangles that I kind of fussy cut out of my fabric. I didn't want to use up all of my fabric on cutting those big squares. And now I need 6 squares that are 8 inches, just the size of my quilt blocks. Everything on the floor ready to be sewn together. And so since this quilt is set on point, I need to sew my rows together diagonally. So I'll begin down in the right hand bottom corner there, and I'm going to pick up my pieces and start sewing them together in rows. When I was done piecing my quilt together, this is what I had. I think it's really beautiful, but it wasn't quite big enough. So I am going to add some borders to this beautiful baby quilt. I have this really pretty light pink and cream print that I think will be perfect to surround my little quilt here. The side borders are 6 inches wide, and thankfully they were just the right length, so I didn't have to piece anything. And the top and the bottom again were just the right size, and they are 4 inches wide. After putting the borders on, my little quilt here measures 43 inches by 50 inches. I love the way it turned out, and just using that fun fabric as my inspiration for this quilt worked out really great. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.